Hey guys, tonight we're entering the freezing, smoke-filled world of medieval parenting, where keeping a baby alive through winter was less a skill and more a daily miracle. No diapers, no heaters, just wool, livestock, and desperation. If that sounds interesting, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy this kind of content. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, and let's begin. Imagine giving birth in a room colder than your refrigerator. Now imagine doing it with nothing but some rushes on the floor, a neighbor named Beatrix holding a goat leg candle, and the gentle, calming encouragement of, try not to scream too loud. Love, the baby might slip out. Welcome to medieval motherhood. It's 1311. It's late November, and things are about to get aggressively frosty. Agnes, 23 years old, and somehow already a mother of 4, blinks awake as dawn pushes through the cowhide flap nailed over her window. The smell of damp straw, yesterday's turnips, and livestock breath forms a rich morning stew. A baby wriggles beside her, still wrapped in the same linen swaddle it's worn since Epiphany. The child's nose is red, eyes shut tight, and chest rising in small, shallow gasps. Congratulations, it's alive. For now. You see, infant mortality in medieval Europe was a full-time hobby for winter. The cold didn't just kill comfort, it killed babies. The average peasant mother didn't get baby monitors or heated nurseries. She got prayer, stale gruel, and whatever warmth she could trap between herself and the livestock. If your newborn made it through February with all 10 toes, you celebrated. Quietly. With more turnips, Agnes sits up, careful not to jostle the clay pot at the foot of the bed. Still faintly warm from the river stone she roasted last night. It's her secret weapon. Not magic, not herbalism. Just one thoroughly charred piece of rock, rolled in rags and jammed under the straw mattress. Did it almost catch the house on fire once? Yes, but it's also the reason her youngest didn't turn blue last week. She leans over and presses her cracked, calloused hand to the baby's chest. Still warm, still breathing. She allows herself a half-second of triumph, then sneezes directly into her sleeve. A reminder, there is no such thing as peace in a medieval winter. Only brief, flickering pauses between disasters. Outside, the frost has claimed the chicken's water bowl and most of the washing line. The thatch roof has leaked again, because of course it has, and the dirt floor is doing its best impression of a swamp. Inside this one-room hovel lives a husband, 4 children, 2 goats, 1 cow, and several generations of fleas. The baby doesn't get its own space. It barely gets its own blanket. And blankets? Luxury items. Agnes, like most peasant mothers, has perfected the ancient art of layering. The baby wears 3 ragged tunics, all hand-sewn from cut-up bits of linen so old they might legally qualify as papyrus. On top of that, a wool cloak salvaged from her grandmother's funeral robe, then a layer of sheep's wool tucked into a sack, and finally, the pièce de résistance, Agnes herself. She sleeps curved around the child like a human radiator. Historians call this co-sleeping. Medieval mothers called it the only way not to raise a popsicle. Babies weren't just snuggled. They were strategically inserted into pockets of warmth between adults, older siblings, and anything with a pulse. Some nights, even the goats helped, not by choice. In fact, livestock played a suspiciously important role in medieval baby care. A cow in the room meant slightly higher ambient temperature, and fewer wolves. And yes, babies did sometimes sleep next to chickens. Feathers are warm. Morality is flexible when frostbite looms. Now, let's talk diapers. Or rather, let's talk about what didn't exist. Nappies in winter? Only if you had spare cloth, which Agnes most certainly does not. Instead, she wraps the baby's bottom in dried moss, loosely tied with frayed string and the lingering hope that nothing leaks before she finds a new patch. Sanitary? No. Effective? Barely. Better than nothing? Arguably. What about food? Breastfeeding, naturally. But a mother's milk supply in winter is as precarious as her roof, and just as likely to fail under stress. Agnes eats once a day, maybe twice on feast days. Her diet is porridge, salted cabbage, and something that may once have been cheese. If she doesn't eat, she doesn't produce milk. If she doesn't produce milk, the baby doesn't eat. It's a terrifyingly short chain. That's why medieval mothers often relied on pap, a paste of breadcrumbs and warm milk, mashed into a sort of primordial baby cereal. When milk ran dry, they used broth, water, or, on very desperate days, wine. Yes, some babies were gently weaned onto alcohol. No, it didn't go well. Back in the hut, Agnes shifts the baby toward the hearth. The fire has gone out again. Of course it has. She'd banked the coals with ash last night, but a draft must have slipped through the gap in the door. Again. She sighs, pulls the baby close, and begins the delicate process of fire resurrection. Flint, steel, and fervent muttering. 1 spark, 2 sparks. Nothing. Her fingers are already going numb. She curses under her breath in a very maternal way. Eventually, with more luck than skill, the embers catch. A single flicker grows into a defiant, smoky flame. Agnes stokes it with peat and dry goat droppings. Not pleasant, but fuel is fuel. The hearth shudders back to life. And so, in a small way, does she. Her oldest, a girl of 10 who thinks she's 20, yawns beside the sleeping cow and asks, "Did the baby make it?" Agnes nods. "So far." The girl grunts and rolls over. She's seen 2 siblings buried. She doesn't trust mornings. Outside, the wind rattles the door. Inside, the fire crackles weakly. The baby breathes softly, and Agnes wraps another blanket around her shoulders. She presses a hand to the baby's chest one more time. Not out of fear this time, but habit. Mothers check, and check again, and again. Because winter is cruel, and warm is never guaranteed. But for now, it's enough. A breath, a flame, a heartbeat, all still here. She exhales slowly, resting her forehead against the baby's. The cold hasn't won yet. There's a sound only medieval parents truly understand. The sudden silence of a baby who should be crying. Agnes jerks awake. It's still dark, though dark is a generous word. The hearth has died again, surrendering to the cold like a knight waving a very damp flag. The rush light has burned out, leaving only the faint shape of her husband's snore and a strong suggestion of goat in the air. She can't hear the baby. For one breathless moment, everything freezes. Not just the room, but her blood, her thoughts, her lungs. She fumbles through the hay mattress like a badger tunneling for hope. Her fingers find the tiny bundle, swaddled tighter than a miser's purse, and press against the baby's chest. There, a flutter, a faint, warm heartbeat, like a candle behind thick wool. Still alive. You don't scream in relief. You don't cry. You just exhale slowly and let the shiver run its course. Because this is normal. This is every night. A quick historical curiosity pill. Medieval parents often slept in a constant state of vigilance. Infant mortality in winter wasn't a statistic. It was an hourly threat. Babies didn't just get sick. They simply stopped breathing. And so mothers like Agnes became professional worriers. They listened for the cough, the gurgle, the shift in breath. They learned to wake at the exact moment the baby's body turned too cold or too still. No alarms, no monitors, just instinct honed by heartbreak. Agnes bundles the baby closer and leans into the cold air. Her breath puffs out like a ghost looking for an escape. She knows what she has to do next. It's her least favorite chore, and that's saying something in a house where she once had to delouse her husband's beard with a burnt stick. She has to go outside. The fire won't survive another hour without more fuel, and the indoor stash is gone. She rises slowly, trying not to wake the cow, who reacts badly to sudden movement ever since that incident with the overturned pail and the chicken. She wraps herself in every layer she can find: tunics, shawls, a cloak that once belonged to her great-aunt, and still smells of onions and regret. Then comes the baby sling, a long, ragged strip of wool, rough as burlap but precious as gold, wrapped tight across her chest. The baby is nestled inside, skin to skin, under the layers. This isn't a cute parenting hack. It's a survival tactic. The child's body steals her heat like a miniature thief. But that's the point. Better to lose warmth than lose the baby. Outside, the wind is doing its best impression of the devil's own choir. The sky is a heavy black, and the ground crunches under her boots, if you can call them that. More like stitched leather suggestions of footwear. She squints toward the woodpile. Gone. Or rather, snowed over. She sighs through her teeth and heads for the dung heap instead. Yes, that's right. Dung. Cow pies. Frozen goat pellets. Whatever came out the back end of anything remotely flammable. Dung was the unsung hero of medieval heating. Dried and packed, it burned slow and steady, and didn't cost a single coin. It also reeked like a boiled demon, but you got used to that around the third hypothermic crisis. She gathers what she can carry, her fingers already numb and stinging. The baby sleeps, blissfully unaware that his entire night's warmth is now riding in a basket full of excrement. Lucky thing. Back inside, the cold hits harder. A still room always feels colder than the world outside, as if it's trying to prove something. She feeds the fire like a beggar bribing a king. The dung sizzles, smokes, then catches. It's not glamorous, but then again, nothing in this house is. Glamour died sometime around Michaelmas, when the cow stepped on her only good bowl. With the hearth revived, the room begins to thaw by degrees. One child coughs in their sleep. Another mutters something about cheese and rolls over. Agnes sits close to the fire and shifts the baby so he faces the heat, but not too close. You don't want roasted baby on the menu. Now comes the feeding. It's been 2 days since she ate anything solid. A crust of rye bread. Some broth so thin it might have just been warm water that once knew a vegetable. Her milk is suffering. The baby latches greedily, but she knows there's barely enough to keep his stomach from echoing. When that happens, she turns to gruel substitute. Crumbled bread, mashed with cow's milk if the cow is generous, or more likely, just warm water and herbs boiled until they resemble soup with abandonment issues. She dips her finger into the mixture, touches it to the baby's lips. He suckles. Good. It'll keep him alive for another few hours. There's a trick here, by the way. It's not just about feeding the baby. It's about warming him from the inside out. Warm food equals warm belly equals slightly better odds of survival. A tiny internal hearth, no chimney required. Beside her, A pot of stones continues to radiate warmth. She placed them there an hour ago, just after cleaning them of last week's soot. Not because she's fastidious, but because last week's soot gave her child a rash. Everything in winter becomes a test. How warm can you get without burning? How much milk before it sours? How long can a baby nap without succumbing to the cold? By the time Dawn returns, Agnes has completed 5 impossible tasks. Stoked a fire from frozen dung, thawed her home, fed her child, warmed her own limbs, and not gone mad in the process. And what does she get for it? A moment. Just one. She lays the baby down on the slightly warmer rushes, nestling him between 2 woolen sacks and a half-dozing chicken. His fingers twitch. His nose wrinkles. He lets out a squeaky breath like a kettle giving up. Still here. She leans back, bones aching, breath shallow, and allows herself, just for a moment, to watch the sun sneak in through the cowhide flap. In medieval motherhood, survival is built out of seconds. And this second? It's a victory. Let's say you've wrapped your baby in every scrap of cloth from here to the compost heap. You fed him broth that tasted like old boots, but warmed him up anyway. The fire's still burning, the goat's behaving. You've done everything right. And then he starts coughing. It's not a big cough, just a soft, wet little hiccup. The kind you barely notice once, then hear again and again and again. Agnes knows that sound. Every mother in the village knows it. Cold is the enemy you can feel, but illness? That's the one that sneaks in quietly and steals what the frost couldn't. It's mid-December now, and if medieval time had a personality, December would be a cruel aunt who shows up late, eats all your food, and then blames you when the chimney collapses. The air inside the house is warmer than outside, barely, but it's also thicker. Smoke clings to the ceiling, smearing it with soot. The hearth huffs a steady stream of whatever didn't burn cleanly last night, which, spoiler, is most of it. And in this charming, unventilated barn, with table aspirations, lives a baby who has no immune system, surrounded by a rotating cast of coughing siblings and livestock with questionable hygiene habits. Agnes cradles the baby and listens closely. That cough again. Louder now. His breath is raspy. Not wheezy exactly, just sticky. There's no doctor to call. No clinic to visit. In medieval England, medicine is a dartboard of guesswork, superstition, and herbs that may or may not actually be parsley. You don't heal, you survive, or you don't. Agnes has one option, the apothecary, or rather, Matilda. She lives in a moss-covered hut just past the stream and smells faintly of thyme and social suspicion. Depending on who you ask, she's either a healer or a hedge witch, possibly both. But Agnes has seen her poultices clear up rashes faster than prayer alone, so the choice is obvious. She wraps the baby tight, tighter than usual. Layers of wool, cloth, a goatskin hood, and a length of linen torn from her wedding dress. Romantic? Not quite. Practical? Yes. You can't baptize a memory. She tucks the bundle close, shouts something vague at her oldest to mind the fire and don't let your brother eat anything that isn't food, and steps outside into the sharp slap of winter air. The path to Matilda's is a muddy mess frozen into angry ridges. The baby's breath fogs the cloth near her chest, each little puff like a countdown. He's warm, but not warmer than yesterday. And that's the problem. Matilda answers the door already muttering. "Didn't bank your fire right, did you?" she says, by way of greeting. "House cold?" "Warm enough," Agnes says. "He's not." The old woman doesn't waste time. She takes the bundle, unwraps just the face, and frowns. Nose red. Lips not quite. He's halfway to windwalkin'. That's an old phrase. It means a baby who's slipping. You'd know it if you saw it. Skin pale, fingers limp, breath shallow. Nothing obviously wrong, just off. Like something inside is retreating, one breath at a time. Matilda bustles about her cottage, which smells strongly of things Agnes can't identify, but assumes were once herbs and not roadkill. She boils something thick and brown in a pot and hands Agnes a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Warm this over coals. Put it under his head, not too close. Steam, not scald. Then she hands her a jar. Goose grease. Rub it on his feet, then his chest. Not his back. You rub his back, the cold digs in deeper. Now, is any of this scientifically accurate? Absolutely not. But in 1311, it's the closest thing to neonatal care there is. And more importantly, it's something to do. You can't fight frost with fists, but you can fight it with friction, folklore, and a very committed goose. Back home, Agnes works fast. She heats the bundle over the embers, checks it 3 times to make sure it won't burn. She unwraps the baby's feet, tiny, wrinkled, and cold, and massages them with the grease. His eyes flicker. That's good. Still here. The steam rises. She holds him near it. He coughs again, then gasps. One of those full-body infant hiccups that ends in a hiccuping sob. She smiles. Yes, that's right. A sob is good. Crying means breath. Crying means the body still thinks survival is worth the effort. She doesn't sleep that night. She sits by the hearth, rocking slowly, whispering nonsense into his ear, half lullaby and half battle cry. The fire crackles, the house groans in the wind, and the baby breathes. Still here. By morning, the coughing has faded to a faint wheeze. He's warmer, hungrier. Agnes allows herself, cautiously, to feel hopeful. But she's still rubbing goose grease into tiny feet and steaming rush bundles like she's cooking her own baby stew, because winter doesn't announce its defeats. It just comes back later, with worse plans. In the medieval mother's war against the cold, there are no clear victories, just tiny truces, fought one heartbeat at a time. She looks down at her son, now suckling like a champion, fists clenched, eyelids fluttering. He's fighting. She is too. Outside, snow begins to fall. Silent, soft, and completely unimpressed. But inside? Inside, the fire holds. And so does she. By January, time has stopped pretending to be linear. It drags like a half-frozen ox cart through mud and memory. Each day looks like the last, gray, hungry, and slightly moldier than you'd prefer. Agnes has given up guessing the date. She measures the season now by smoke patterns, goat behavior, and the precise angle at which her roof leaks into the stew pot. But the baby is still alive. Let's just take a moment to appreciate that. In a world where nearly half of infants die before their first birthday, this 6-week-old bundle of coughs and squeaks is a walking miracle. Or rather, a not quite rolling one. He doesn't have a name yet. Not officially. See, peasants didn't always name their babies at birth. You waited. Sometimes for weeks. Sometimes until after their first tooth. Often until spring, when naming felt less like tempting fate. But Agnes has a name in her heart. She just doesn't say it out loud. Instead, she says things like, "My sprout," or "little lump," or, when he spits up directly into her only decent wool, "You ungrateful turnip." Terms of affection, all. This morning, she wakes up to the sound of mice chewing through the bread sack, again, and the baby making tiny huffing sounds like a hedgehog working out a grievance. He's hungry. Good. Hunger means energy. Energy means not dying. She shifts him to her breast, teeth chattering as the cold smacks her in the joints like an angry tax collector. The hearth embers glow weakly. She'll need to tend to them soon, but for now, she just sits. Sometimes, sitting is an act of resistance, especially when everything else aches. Here's a little-known historical fact. Breastfeeding helped medieval women survive the winter. Not because it magically warmed them, but because it delayed the return of menstruation. And menstruation in a world without hygiene products? Let's just say, inconvenient. More importantly, breastfeeding delayed the next pregnancy. This mattered. A lot. In a world where birth control was mostly theoretical and often lethal, looking at you, Pennyroyal T, the only real spacing mechanism between children was a working pair of nipples and the body's desperate desire not to be pregnant again in the middle of February. Agnes knows this, not in scientific terms, but in the language of blood and bed space and how many mouths can survive on half a sack of oats. This baby needs to make it through winter. She doesn't have room for another yet. Later, she shuffles toward the hearth. It's her turn to do the fire dance. Ash poking, coal stirring, flint striking, curse muttering. The baby is back in the sling, head tucked under her chin. His breath tickles her neck. Still warm. She adds dried moss and a few twigs, anything that will burn without exploding, and fans the ember pile. The flames catch with a reluctant sigh. Her daughter groans from the corner. "Is it today yet?" "Barely," Agnes replies. The eldest boy coughs and begins poking the wall with a stick. You assume he's checking for leaks. He's not. He's just bored. It's been weeks since they left the house except for water, fuel, or very urgent cow diplomacy. Even the goat seems emotionally drained. January is when patience dies. And yet, you endure. Because enduring is what peasants do best. Agnes parcels out breakfast. A thin oat mash, reheated for the 4th time, with exactly 2 turnip shavings and 1 prayer. The children don't complain. Complaints burn calories, and calories are precious. Afterward, she wraps the baby tighter and steps outside, just for a moment, to fetch ice. Not to eat, obviously. Ice is useful for packing the wall gaps. Yes, you heard that right. In deep winter, some peasants insulated their homes with blocks of snow and ice, especially in the northern regions. It's counterintuitive but strangely effective. Cold air outside, cold wall inside, less temperature shock. Like reverse logic engineering. Medieval edition. While outside, Agnes notices the smoke from her roof hole drifting lazily to the west. That means wind, but not snow. Good. A brief break in the weather means washing. Not clothes, of course. Let's not be ridiculous. The baby. Washing an infant in winter is a logistical nightmare. Water must be warmed, gently, not boiling. Rags must be clean, or at least not visibly moldy. And you can only undress the child for about 40 seconds before you risk freezing his belly button into a historical artifact. She lays out the bath setup like a military campaign. A small tin basin placed near the hearth. Cloths warmed near the fire. One sibling to hold the pot. Another to guard the goat, who has developed a worrying interest in warm water. The bath takes 3 minutes. 1 minute to strip, 1 to scrub, 1 to dry and rewrap with the urgency of a battlefield medic. The baby screams through most of it, which is good. Crying means circulation. Afterward, Swaddled and steaming slightly, he blinks at her with the vaguely judgmental gaze of someone who did not consent to this experience. She smiles. "You'll live," she whispers. "Sorry about your dignity." That night, they huddle close. Agnes, the children, the baby tucked in like a secret between her ribs and her shawl. The goat curls by the hearth. The cow sighs against the far wall. Even the mice seem subdued. The fire cracks gently, and for once, no one coughs. Outside, the world is frozen. But inside, there is warmth. Not enough. Never enough. But just enough. And in medieval winter, that's everything. By February, hope becomes dangerous. The sun stays up a little longer, just long enough to trick you into thinking the worst is over. A bird sings outside, and the children gasp like it's a miracle. The snow melts slightly, then refreezes into a personal assault course designed by nature to ruin your ankles. And inside the house, things begin to smell. Worse, somehow. Agnes knows better than to celebrate. February is the liar's month. Warmer than January, colder than sense, and fully capable of taking everything you love the moment you let your guard down. But the baby is still alive. That's 4 words she didn't dare believe she'd get to say. He's pinker now. Louder. He wails like a king issuing commands from a swaddle throne. He chews his fists with aggressive determination. And he poops. Oh, does he poop? If there's one thing a medieval mother knows to interpret as a good sign, it's bowel movements. Regular, noisy, fragrant bowel movements. It means he's eating. It means he's warm. It means, perhaps, he's staying. You might be tempted to imagine Agnes resting now. She's made it through the darkest stretch of winter. Surely things are easier? Absolutely not. Now comes the hardest part. Surviving the false finish line. See, babies die of exposure in December. They die of illness in January. But February is when they die of accidents. The fire is hotter now, burning stronger thanks to a bit of stolen dry wood and the return of slightly less damp moss. That's good. It also means that any baby rolling a bit too far could be introduced to open flame. There are no playpens, no safety gates, no child-proof hearth guards, just vigilance. And Agnes? She's tired. Proper, bone-deep tired. The kind that sets in once you've been afraid for so long that your muscles forget how to relax. Her shoulders are permanently hunched. Her eyelids twitch. Her hands shake when they're still. She hasn't slept more than 2 hours in a row since Advent. So she invents what every exhausted medieval mother eventually does. The baby tether. It's not a leash, technically. It's a strip of cloth. A belt from an old tunic. Tied gently around the baby's middle and looped through the handle of her basket. She wears the basket on her hip while cooking, spinning, patching, and generally doing the 90 other things expected of her in a day. It's crude. It's clever. It works. While she sews patches onto her husband's winter hose, which have developed an indecent hole in a highly unfortunate location, the baby naps beside her, safely tethered, fingers twitching in some delightful goat-chasing dream. Outside, the last of the snow begins to give way to mud. Inside, life continues its messy, miraculous march forward. But just as she begins to believe they might actually make it, something changes. The baby's cry shifts. It's not louder. It's thinner. A breathless, reedy cry that doesn't rise, just drains, like sound trying to escape through fabric. Agnes freezes. Her fingers go still, the half-mended hose falling from her lap. She picks him up. His skin is warm. That's good. but his face is pale. He doesn't focus. His cry stops as quickly as it began. She doesn't hesitate. Not this time. No herbs, no goose fat, no steaming stones. She unbuttons her tunic. Not an act of madness, an act of strategy. Skin to skin, she presses him against her chest, wrapping them both in every blanket, cloak, and shawl she can find. She pulls the blankets over their heads, creating a little world of shared breath, muffled light, and the steady thrum of her heartbeat. Because if there's one thing a mother's body knows how to do, it's keep something else alive, even at the cost of her own warmth. This is known today as kangaroo care. In 1312, it's just what you do when the fire feels too far away and your baby feels too quiet. Minutes pass. Long, slow, excruciating minutes. And then, a sound. A squawk. Not a cry. A squawk of irritation, like a baby who has just realized he's too warm and deeply offended by the injustice. She laughs, softly. A cracked, lopsided sound she hasn't made since Michaelmas. He's fine. He's fine. She unwraps them slowly, carefully, and feeds him. He drinks with the fury of someone who thought they'd been abandoned, but intends to recover with a vengeance. Outside, a crow caws. A goat sneezes. One of the children announces that the latrine bucket has frozen in a very impressive shape. Life continues. That evening, Agnes pulls out a bit of coal from the hearth and scrawls a name onto the underside of a broken clay bowl. It's not official. Not yet. But the baby has made it this far. He deserves to be named. She whispers it as he sleeps. Not too loud, just in case February's still listening. The second history is how medieval villagers endured the harshest winters. Imagine waking up with your nose frozen to your own face. Congratulations. It's winter in a medieval village, and the inside of your house is trying very hard to become the outside. Your bed? Not so much a bed as a lumpy pile of straw vaguely shaped like where a person once gave up. Your pillow is an old tunic rolled into a ball, and if you're lucky, it hasn't been chewed on by a rat during the night. And yes, rats. They're not just roommates. They're part of the heating plan. Warm-blooded, fuzzy, morally dubious, but warm. You blink groggily at the smoky rafters. The fire has burned down to a few glowing coals. Someone was supposed to bank it last night. Carefully cover the embers in ash so they'd smolder through till morning. Clearly, someone failed. Possibly Uncle Willem, whose fire maintenance skills fall somewhere between useless and actively dangerous. And now, the hut is cold. Not brisk, not nippy. Bone-scraping, lung-freezing cold. The kind that creeps into your joints, stares into your soul, and says, "Let's see how long your toes stay attached today." This is not the charming, snow-dusted postcard version of winter. This is the version where you wake up stiff, itchy, coughing, and clinging to the faint hope that your fingers still bend. You're wrapped in every piece of fabric you own, which amounts to 2 woolen tunics, 1 scratchy cloak, and a pair of socks you share with your sibling on alternating days. The clothes are stiff with old sweat and smoke and something else best left unidentified. They haven't been washed since Michaelmas, and it's now February. But dirt, believe it or not, is part of the plan. Historical curiosity pill. Medieval peasants didn't wash their winter layers often. The built-up grime actually helped insulate. Think of it as a tragic, itchy version of Gore-Tex. You don't sleep alone either. The entire family, and sometimes livestock, piles into one corner of the house. The warm corner, which is a lie, but it makes people feel better. You're currently wedged between your grandmother and a goat named Oswin. Oswin snores and drools, but he's 400 pounds of heat-emitting cud chewer, so he stays. Across the room, your younger brother has somehow rolled into the coldest part of the hut, the bit near the door where the draft sneaks in like a rude ghost. He looks like a bundled turnip with feet. No one dares get up yet. Movement invites cold. You lie there, pretending to still be asleep, hoping someone else will rekindle the fire. But everyone else is doing the same thing. This is medieval winter psychology. If you lie very still and pretend you're dead, perhaps the morning will go away. Eventually, your mother sighs, the universal signal that yes, she will get up and restart the fire. Again, because clearly no one else is capable of such heroism. She throws on her outer cloak, the one with more holes than fabric, and marches over to the hearth, poking through the ashes with the resigned fury of someone who knows exactly who didn't bank the fire correctly. Still you, Uncle Willem. It takes flint, steel, dry kindling, and several loud sighs to get it going. The kindling is damp, because of course it is, and the smoke immediately begins billowing into the room. Historical curiosity pill. Most medieval homes had no chimney. Smoke just floated out through a hole in the roof, the door, or your lungs. Side benefit, it killed fleas. Downside, it killed you a little too. The room slowly fills with warmth and haze. Someone sneezes. Someone else coughs. Everyone ignores it. You rise from the bedstraw like a creaky specter, brushing hay from your hair and hoping there's a scrap of something edible left for breakfast. If it's not frozen solid, last night's gruel has achieved the texture of lumpy concrete. You take a bite anyway. Your teeth protest, loudly. No one talks much in the morning. Words cost energy. Energy you need to get through the next 12 hours of freezing air, frozen water, and the always entertaining threat of death by exposure. You bundle up to go outside. Multiple wool layers, cloak, fur if you're fancy, you're not, and a hat that's mostly just a sock with ambition. Mittens? Try wrapping rags around your hands and pretending they're gloves. Outside, the world is white, brittle, and mean. The thatched roofs sag with snow. The sky hangs low and gray, like it's reconsidering ever being blue again. And the air has that particular sharpness that tells you, don't breathe too deeply unless you enjoy a side of pneumonia. The chores don't stop because your joints ache. The livestock must be fed. Firewood must be found, assuming the Lord's foresters don't catch you borrowing it. Ice must be broken in the stream so you can draw water, and immediately regret that choice as your fingers scream in betrayal. Winter is not just a season. It's an adversary, a test, a multi-month boss fight where the enemies are the wind, the snow, and your own nose attempting to defect. And yet, you endure. You press straw against the cracks in the wall. You bank the fire, properly this time. You huddle together like medieval lasagna and learn to breathe through your nose so the cold air doesn't kill you from the inside out. You chew stale bread, drink warm beer, and whisper prayers to St. Nicholas. Not for gifts, but for surviving until March. Because March means mud and sun and the glorious sound of things not being frozen. But that's a distant dream. For now, there's frost on your blanket, a chicken roosting on your foot, and a fresh draft finding a new way in. And winter is far from done with you. You know it's cold when the cow refuses to get up. That's the scene this morning. A deeply unimpressed cow named Mags lying stubbornly in the middle of your one-room house, radiating heat and judgment in equal measure. Someone has to move her. Someone has to milk her. That someone, unfortunately, is you. You approach carefully, because nothing ruins a medieval morning faster than a back-leg kick to the face. Mags snorts in disapproval, but relents. You crouch beside her, hands nearly numb despite your best rag-wrapped efforts, and begin the task. The milk is warm, which feels like a betrayal. Why can't the rest of the world be this temperature? Around you, the household groans into life. Everyone is wrapped in more layers than a festival onion, and yet everyone's still shivering. Someone's cloak has frozen to the wall. Your sister is trying to chip the ice off her shoes. Your father is muttering to the fire, as if swearing at it will convince it to burn hotter. It won't. But we respect the effort. Breakfast is the usual: grain porridge thick enough to hold a pitchfork upright, a few turnips, possibly a bit of dried onion, if the mice didn't get there first. You chew slowly, not out of pleasure, but because your jaw is still thawing from sleep. Outside, the air is blinding with frost. The ground crunches underfoot, like stepping on frozen bread. The trees groan under the weight of their own misery. And somewhere in the distance, a rooster announces that it, too, regrets waking up. There's no time to be sentimental about it. The animals need feeding. The woodpile is dwindling. And then there's the small matter of keeping the house from collapsing under the weight of the snow. Priorities, in order of importance: warmth, structure, food, not dying. Historical curiosity pill. Medieval peasants couldn't legally gather firewood from the Lord's forest without permission. Doing so could result in a fine or, in bad years, public punishment. So much for warming up by the fire, unless you fancy a side of corporal penalty. You grab a hatchet and trudge into the woods anyway. Because laws are lovely in theory, but frozen children are more persuasive than forest regulations. Now, let's talk architecture, and we're using the term loosely. Your home, like most peasant cottages, is a miracle of engineering only in the sense that it hasn't collapsed yet. The walls are made of wattle and daub, woven sticks slathered in a charming blend of mud, straw, and animal dung. Stylish? Not remotely. Insulating? About as much as a lace curtain. But it's what you have. And in winter, every smear of manure is a declaration of war against the wind. Cracks in the walls are patched with moss, fabric scraps, and sometimes chewed bread if you're out of options. Roof leaks are dealt with by stuffing in reeds or shouting at them until you feel slightly better. The floor is dirt. Literally dirt. Slightly trampled, occasionally swept, and frozen solid for 3 months straight. It is, essentially, indoor nature. To combat this, the family lays down fresh rushes, long, dry grasses, in hopes of creating a carpet. It's more of a squishy compost layer, truth be told. And after a few weeks, it begins to resemble a particularly fragrant swamp. Fleas love it. You, less so. Still, the most important player in the war against cold is the hearth. The fire isn't just where meals are cooked. It is warmth, life, and, most days, the only thing standing between your family and a very poetic obituary. It smokes like a tavern on fire, but it works, sort of. Firewood is rationed like gold. Peat blocks and dried dung are pressed into service when wood runs low. You have a special stick, the poking stick, for shifting the coals and reviving flames. Lose it, and you might as well move into the barn. Actually, that might be warmer. At night, the family follows a sacred ritual: fire banking. Someone, read you, piles ash over the glowing embers to keep them alive until morning. Do it wrong, and the fire dies. Do it right, and you get a morning flame with minimal tears. It's less science and more superstition, passed down like a family secret, complete with contradicting instructions from every older relative. Tonight, there's a plan to share sleeping space with the neighbors. Their roof has collapsed. Snow finally won that battle. And communal body heat is now the best solution available. You groan at the thought of cramming more bodies into the already crowded corner. But survival isn't a solo sport in the Middle Ages. It's a full contact group activity. By late evening, the neighbors arrive. 4 people, 2 goats, and an elderly dog named Simon, who smells like wet parchment. They wedge in by the fire. You are now a sardine in a blanket burrito, pressed against relatives, livestock, and one unidentifiable lumpy shape that may or may not be your uncle's knee. There's no bedtime routine, just a series of loud sighs, shifting cloaks, and the occasional elbow to the ribs as people adjust. The goats bleat once, then settle down. The dog farts. Someone coughs. Someone else whispers a prayer. And slowly, the room quiets. You breathe carefully, through your nose, shallow and slow, because too much cold air will burn your lungs raw. You feel the warmth of bodies around you. You hear the faint crackle of the hearth. You try not to think about the ice creeping in at the door. Tomorrow, the wind may find a new gap in the wall. The food may run low. Another roof might give way. But tonight, you are not alone. You have warmth, however fleeting. You have turnips, and you have Simon, who has now rolled onto your feet with the weight of a judgmental sack of rocks. This is winter. It is miserable. It is endless. But for now, it is survivable. There's a special kind of quiet that happens in a medieval village just before dawn in deep winter. A stillness so complete, you could hear a mouse cough. But no one hears the mouse, because everyone is wide awake listening to the fire sputtering its last pathetic breath. Someone, and let's not point fingers, but it was definitely Cousin Elric, forgot to bank the fire properly again. You all wake up to an Arctic breeze sauntering through the hut like it owns the place. The hearth, once the glowing heart of the home, is now a pile of gray regret. You scramble for flint and steel, trying not to cry on your frost-bitten fingers, because tears might actually freeze on your face. A few panicked sparks, a desperate puff of smoke, and finally, mercifully, a flame. Elric mumbles an apology and earns a grunt. Not forgiveness, just a grunt. It's too cold for forgiveness. As the fire regains its courage, you rise from your hay-stuffed bedding. The straw is damp, because of course it is. The floor beneath you is solid ice, and your shirt, still damp from yesterday's work, now feels like it was stored overnight in a snowbank. Probably because it was. You get dressed by putting on more of what you're already wearing. Shirt over tunic over shirt, cloak over cloak. You are now 60% wool and 40% discomfort. Your limbs move like they've been stuffed into sacks of frozen porridge. Welcome to peak medieval fashion. The layer until you can't bend your arms. Look, historical curiosity pill. Peasants in winter often wore every garment they owned simultaneously. Sometimes 4 or 5 tunics at once. Removing any of them before spring was considered optimistic, if not reckless. Once dressed, you tackle the morning chore that defines winter survival, making sure no one, including the cow, has frozen to the ground. Livestock, as it turns out, are very good at generating heat. They are also very good at snoring, sneezing on you, and occasionally relieving themselves in places that were, until recently, considered your bedroom. Still, cows, goats, and pigs are winter MVPs. They share your space. They add body heat. And they don't complain. Unlike humans, you sweep the rushes, or at least shift them into a new, less muddy position, and sprinkle fresh herbs to mask the aroma of eau de livestock. A few sprigs of rosemary, maybe thyme. It smells nice for exactly 15 seconds before being swallowed by the house's general essence of smoke, goat, and despair. Breakfast today is a thick stew made from yesterday's stew, which was made from the stew before that. It is, at this point, less a meal and more a culinary timeline. You chew through barley, onions, and an unidentified root that might be a turnip or might be a knucklebone. Hard to say. You eat it anyway. Now, about water. Water in winter is a cruel joke. It is either frozen solid or so cold it might bite you. The village stream, your usual source, is locked under a thick crust of ice. Breaking through it requires a hammer, a prayer, and the upper body strength of a small horse. You carry it back to the house in heavy wooden buckets, half of which spills down your front and immediately transforms your clothing into a walking icicle. Drinking water is, as always, discouraged. It's full of things you can't see and don't want to meet. So the family continues the great tradition of breakfast beer. Weak ale brewed just enough to be safer than the stream. It tastes like hay, sadness, and survival. Children drink it. So do the elderly. Nobody's celebrating. They're just not dying, which is, frankly, enough. You head out into the village square, where other equally layered, equally frozen souls are already at work. The air smells like smoke and thawing manure. Someone's trying to chop wood with a hatchet that's frozen to the stump. Another neighbor is patching their collapsing roof with turf and sheer denial. Everyone is wrapped in scarves, hoods, and cloaks until they resemble damp laundry trying to run errands. Today's goal is ambitious. Rebuild the animal shelter. The last one caved in under the snow, and the animals now stare at you with the judgment of beasts who know their barn had one job. You work in shifts to avoid freezing. 10 minutes hammering. 10 minutes by the fire. 10 minutes cursing the fact that you weren't born in a warmer century. By midday, your hands are raw. Your nose is running somewhere down your chin, and your feet haven't had circulation since sunrise. Someone brings out a hunk of bread. It's hard enough to qualify as a weapon. You soak it in stew until it no longer threatens your dental integrity, and eat it in silence, steam from your breath curling into the air like ghostly sighs. Historical curiosity pill. During hard winters, bread was often bulked up with sawdust, mashed acorns, or ground bark, none of which won culinary awards, but all of which helped prevent starvation. Afternoon light fades early in winter. By the time the sun kisses the horizon, around what might be 4 p.m., but you don't own a clock, everything turns a pale, sickly gray. The kind of gray that makes even the snow look tired. You finish the day's labor and shuffle home, exhausted. Someone's goat has gone missing. Possibly wandered into a neighbor's house. Possibly eaten. No one's asking questions. Inside, the fire is strong again. Blankets, if you can call them that, are being laid out. Everyone begins the slow process of turning into a human lasagna. Layers upon layers of people and cloaks and animals and damp-smelling warmth. Tonight, you get a spot near the fire. A miracle. Your side might even thaw by morning. As you settle into the crunchy straw and try not to breathe too deeply, cold air is still not your friend. Your mother leads a quiet prayer. Not for riches, not for comfort, just for warmth. And one more sunrise. Because in the medieval winter, that's the most any of you can ask for. And sometimes, that's enough. You wake up to the sound of someone cursing softly and repeatedly under their breath. It's your father. He stepped in something warm and squishy, and absolutely not where it should be. The pig has done it again. Staked its claim in the middle of the house like a very rude houseguest, with no regard for indoor etiquette. You all groan. Not because this is unusual, but because it's just so early to be washing feet in melted snow. Such is the glamorous life of winter cohabitation. In summer, pigs live in pens. In winter, pigs live with you, alongside cows, goats, chickens, and a dog named Wolf, who has somehow wedged himself under the fire bench and refuses to move unless bribed with something meat-adjacent. Animals aren't roommates by choice. They're heating systems with hooves. Every one of them radiates body heat like a wool-wrapped furnace. The more of them inside, the better your odds of waking up with all 10 fingers. Of course, they're also noisy, flatulent, and occasionally try to eat your bedding. But again, warmth. You scrape the pig mess into a pile and toss straw on top. Congratulations, medieval air freshener. The house already smells like a stew of smoke, sweat, and wet fur. One more note in the olfactory symphony won't make much difference. Today's crisis begins not with a bang, but with a slow drip. Right above the hearth. A leak. A leak in the roof. A leak in the roof above the fire, which, in medieval peasant terms, is roughly equivalent to finding a hole in your only lifeboat during the storm. You all stare up at it in silence, as if you can intimidate it into going away. You cannot. The thatch has sagged under the snow, and now water is dripping slowly, almost mockingly, onto the hearthstones. Every drop a small, wet insult to your survival efforts. Right, your mother says through gritted teeth, and everyone knows this means emergency roof patching is now the day's #1 priority. Historical curiosity pill. Thatch roofing, while cheap and locally sourced, was notoriously vulnerable to winter collapse. Patching was often done with whatever was available: rags, reeds, turf, or in truly desperate moments, bundles of old clothing. You head outside to collect repair materials. The cold air slaps your face like a tax collector with a grudge. The snow crunches beneath your boots, or rather, beneath the layers of cloth pretending to be boots. You've wrapped your feet in wool scraps and shoved them into wooden clogs. Fashionable? No. Functional? Barely. Up on the roof, the thatch is slick, brittle, and home to at least 2 very offended birds. You stuff it with moss, wedges of dried mud, and a broken basket that's been retired from turnip duty. It's not pretty, but then again, neither is survival. You return to the ground frozen, damp, and lightly bruised from slipping off the ladder twice. Your reward? A lunch of turnip broth and half a barley cake that tastes faintly of mildew and 14th century despair. Someone suggests a hot stone tonight. This is medieval luxury. The process is simple. Heat a large rock in the fire until it's almost dangerous. Wrap it in cloth. Stick it under the hay mattress. Try not to set your bed on fire. You nominate your younger brother to retrieve the stone from the fire. He does, with all the caution of a person who's been burned before. Because he has been burned before, multiple times. The rock, once wrapped and secured under the bedding, radiates a brief, glorious heat. It won't last the night, but it will last long enough to warm your feet. And that, honestly, feels like wealth. As night falls, you notice the hearth smoke isn't drifting upward anymore. It's hanging, thick, lazy clouds of it lingering at head level. Ah, yes, the house is full of smoke again. Possibly due to the patch job above the fire. Possibly due to the wind reversing its loyalty. Either way, Your lungs are now participating in an unintentional meat smoking process. No one complains too loudly. The smoke, unpleasant as it is, also has its uses. It drives out fleas, masks worse smells, and, fun bonus, may actually warm the air slightly. Or maybe that's just what you tell yourself between coughs. The family settles in for the night. You huddle together once more in the straw nest, forming what can only be described as a medieval cuddle fortress, a tangle of limbs, cloaks, goats, and communal despair. Your grandmother insists on taking the outer edge tonight, claims her old bones don't feel the cold the way they used to. This is a lie, but she's earned it. The fire is banked with expert hands, dry ash sprinkled, coals gently covered, a few whispered curses for luck. You hope it holds. As you pull the blanket, such as it is, over your shoulder, you feel the warmth from the stone fade slowly, like a fading memory of a summer you're starting to suspect may have been a dream. You close your eyes. You breathe shallowly, always through your nose, and try not to think about how many more nights of this are left, because winter doesn't leave all at once. It lingers, creeps, waits, and tomorrow, it might come for the chimney. You wake up to a miracle. The ember is still glowing. One tiny coal, buried in ash, clinging to life like a stubborn red eye refusing to blink. It's not much, but it's enough. You don't have to rebuild the fire from scratch, don't have to shiver your way through the sacred ritual of flint and regret. You nudge the ember gently, add kindling with reverence, and blow. The fire coughs, then crackles. And you, soot-faced, fingers stiff, eyes watering, whisper thanks, not just to the gods, but to your own resilience. Outside, it's snowing again, because of course it is. Fat flakes fall like confetti at a party you didn't ask to attend. The wind rattles the shutters like a beggar demanding attention. But the fire burns. The family gathers close, faces pink with cold and smoke. Your mother ladles out something resembling stew. You're not entirely sure what's in it. Could be barley, could be thistle, possibly yesterday's bread boiled beyond recognition. But it's hot, and that's all that matters. Today is market day, or rather, would be market day if anyone had anything worth trading that wasn't frozen to the wall or chewing cud in the corner. Still, you bundle up every tunic, every cloak, every scrap of itchy wool until you resemble a lumpy walking tapestry of desperation. You step outside, breath pluming like a dragon who's had a very long week, and head toward the village square. The village is alive. In the loosest sense of the word, smoke rises from a dozen thatched huts, each one a smoke-belching monument to stubbornness. Children, swaddled like startled sausages, waddle between snowdrifts. One falls face first into a drift and simply stays there for a moment. No one reacts. They know the drill. Neighbors trade goods, news, and insults in equal measure. Someone's firewood has gone missing. Borrowed, they say with medieval diplomacy. A widow's goat froze in the night. Someone else offers to share theirs. The village knits itself back together through shared necessity and mutual frostbite. Historical curiosity pill. In harsh winters, medieval villages often pooled resources. If one family's fire went out, others might carry a glowing coal wrapped in wool to relight it. Warmth was communal, because survival was not a solo sport. You return home with a crust of bread, half a leek, and a suspicious hunk of cheese. The cheese smells like it lost a bet, but it's calories. You eat it anyway. It fights back. You still win. Back at the hut, The leak in the roof has stopped, temporarily frozen over by a gift from nature. The pig has somehow claimed the warmest spot by the fire. Your father tries to move it, then wisely gives up. No one argues with pigs in winter. They're too warm and too stubborn. As night creeps in once more, earlier than ever, like a dinner guest who doesn't understand clocks, your family settles into the evening ritual. The embers are banked again. Cloaks and blankets are shared. Positions are negotiated with the delicate diplomacy of a medieval chess match. Grandmother once again insists she feels fine on the outside edge. Everyone knows she's lying, but no one argues. She's earned that dignity. And then, quietly, someone begins to sing. Just a low hum at first, wordless, but familiar. An old winter lullaby that's been passed down through frost-bitten generations. One by one, the others join in, creaky, tuneless, off-key, but warm in a way that wool never could be. The goats bleat softly, the fire pops, a baby stirs, then sighs. And you close your eyes. This is the truth about medieval winter. It didn't care if you were noble or nameless. It came for everyone, fierce, silent, and relentless. It peeled back the layers of comfort and left only the raw core of what mattered. Warmth, food, family, fire. There were no silver linings, only straw-stuffed bedding, only cracked walls and soot-stained faces. But there was also community, laughter, a song, a spark. And somehow, through ritual, superstition, stubbornness, and sheer human cussedness, they made it. One frozen breath at a time. Outside, the wind howls across the fields like a warning. But inside, the fire glows, and the peasants dream of spring. The third history is how nobles survived, when their castles froze. Over congratulations, noble friend, it's January, it's 1349, and your fortress of stone and status is less a seat of luxury and more a medieval meat locker. You might be the third baron of someplace unpronounceable, draped in heraldic glory, but right now your nose is purple and your chamber pot is frozen solid. Ah yes, the medieval castle, symbol of power, wealth, and year-round suffering. Because while peasants huddled in their mud huts cursing the frost, nobles did much the same thing, only in drafty, echoing halls large enough to host a modest thunderstorm indoors. Let's set the mood. You wake up in your bed. A grand canopied contraption carved from oak and draped in heavy tapestries that cost more than most villages. Sounds luxurious, right? Except you're buried under furs like a forgotten relic and still can't feel your toes. The stone floor radiates the kind of chill that makes bones whimper, and your breath hovers in the air above you like a little ghost of poor architectural planning. Because here's the secret, nobody tells you about castles. They're freezing. All the time. Massive stone walls were great for keeping out enemies and displaying your questionable taste in family crests, but they were terrible at holding in heat. There's a reason every noble portrait features someone in at least 6 layers. Fashion? Please. They were one missed hearth away from becoming elegant popsicles. And yes, you had fireplaces, 1 per room if you were lucky. But calling them effective would be generous. They roared in the center of the chamber, throwing smoke upward toward a hole in the wall optimistically called a chimney. But most of the heat went straight up with the smoke. The result? Your left cheek is melting while your right ear is being colonized by frost gremlins. Symmetry, medieval style. So how did nobles actually survive when their castles froze over? With a combination of denial, animal skins, servants, and delusions of superiority. Let's begin, shall we? First, the layering. Nobles didn't just dress up, they dressed strategically. A fine linen shirt next to the skin, soft enough to remind you that you're better than everyone, followed by 1 or 2 wool tunics. Over that, a fur-lined surcoat or doublet, ideally made from something expensive and extinct-looking. If it had paws once, it was probably on your back now. And beneath all that, linen brays, fancy medieval boxer briefs, which had the absorbing power of wet parchment and the warmth of a disappointed parent. Still, better than nothing. Barely. Now, let's talk accessories. Gloves, hats, and hoods weren't just stylish. They were survival gear. A noblewoman might wrap her headdress with veils and padded coifs until her own mother wouldn't recognize her. Gentlemen favored tall felt hats or fur-lined chaperones, not because they were fashionable, but because ears are surprisingly detachable in sub-zero temperatures. Historical curiosity pill. In some castle inventories, specific gloves were listed as bed gloves, worn in bed to keep fingers from turning blue while you dreamed of a warmer afterlife. But no amount of layering could save you from the deeper enemy, the stone itself. Castle floors weren't just cold, they were actively hostile. They radiated chill like a vengeful spirit, soaking up whatever heat your fire reluctantly offered and spitting it back as icy disdain. Carpets helped, if you had them, though most weren't underfoot. They hung on walls as medieval insulation panels. Floor rugs were rare, precious, and, let's be honest, mostly stolen from Byzantium. So, nobles adapted by clustering into what might generously be called cozy zones. These were small enclosed chambers within the larger hall, created by setting up wooden screens or tapestry partitions to trap warmth around a single hearth. Think of it as building a tent inside your house, only instead of nylon and zippers, it was velvet and draft-resistant hope. And speaking of fire, let's give a warm round of applause to the real MVP of castle life. The brazier. These portable metal bowls filled with hot coals were carried from room to room by servants, radiating heat like disgruntled little dragons. Braziers went under chairs, near beds, beside writing desks. But here's the catch. No carbon monoxide detectors. If you shut the windows too tightly, congratulations, you're warm and unconscious. Nobles didn't freeze to death. They just quietly smoked themselves like expensive cheese. Now, let's discuss beds, or more specifically, bed strategies. Your four-poster bed wasn't just grand, it was practical. Curtains weren't for privacy, they were for survival. You drew them tight at night, trapping in body heat and reducing the ambient temperature from alpine expedition to lukewarm burial mound. Hot stones and bed warmers were also part of the nightly routine. Servants would heat large river stones in the fire, wrap them in cloth, and tuck them into the bedding an hour before sleep. And no, you didn't do this yourself. You had a valet or a chambermaid. Heaven forbid you touch a rock like a commoner. Meals, too, were adapted for the cold. Breakfast might include mulled wine or hot ale, sometimes poured into a pewter cup that doubled as a hand warmer. Dishes were served in stages from hot to hottest, not because nobles loved soups and stews so much, but because solid food had a habit of going frigid before reaching the end of the table. And remember, this was all taking place in a building where the bathroom was basically a stone box with a hole in it, perched dramatically over the castle wall. You want to feel alive? Try sprinting to the garderobe at 3:01 a.m. with your candle guttering and the wind howling like a tax collector. Yet despite all this suffering, nobles considered themselves blessed. Why? Because unlike peasants, they didn't have to sleep with the pigs or bathe in a stream filled with last week's exorcism runoff. No, they froze in style. That was the difference. Still, the chill was relentless. It sank into walls, gnawed at bones, and whispered through keyholes. Which meant the real secret to noble survival wasn't fur, fire, or fortress. It was servants. Lots and lots of servants. But we'll get to them next time. And exactly what those shivering souls had to do to keep the castle from becoming a glorified ice sculpture. For now, imagine you're back in bed. The fire's nearly out. The curtains are drawn tight. And someone's left a gently steaming brick at your feet. The wind moans through the arrow slits like a lost minstrel. And you wonder, not for the first time, if a warm mud hut might not be so terrible after all. Sleep tight. Don't let the frost nibble your nose. But here we are, deep in the bowels of a noble household, where the staff responsible for keeping his lordship's backside warm have themselves gone slightly translucent from the cold. Welcome back to our frosty little tale, where castles pretend to be homes and end up feeling more like glamorous stone refrigerators. If you thought noble life in winter was a study in luxury, think again. The real engine of survival wasn't the fur-lined cloak or the flaming brazier. It was an army of underpaid, over-frozen servants trying to keep the castle from icing over like a badly managed meat locker. Let's take you inside. Not the main hall where the tapestries flutter in the draft like medieval air fresheners. No, we're going downstairs, where the real magic and frostbite happened. Welcome to the servants' quarters, part dormitory, part frost chamber, part miracle of human endurance. The typical noble household had a full cast of characters: stewards, pages, maids, cooks, grooms, torchbearers, cupbearers, and that one kid whose job it was to warm the Lord's slippers with his armpits. Each person had a role, and in winter, that role mostly involved being cold for someone else's comfort. Historical curiosity pill. In wealthier castles, there were sometimes entire roles dedicated to fire maintenance, such as the fire ward, whose job was to keep the hearths lit and distribute embers to other rooms. Basically, a full-time medieval flame babysitter. Now, let's say you're a chambermaid. Your job is to wake up before sunrise, which in winter is a theoretical concept at best. Stumble through the castle in pitch darkness and start lighting fires. Not in one room, in all the rooms. Bedrooms, halls, kitchens, and even those ridiculous tiny chapel spaces where Lady Marjorie insists on praying at 5 a.m., as if God appreciates shivering more than sincerity. And lighting fires in the Middle Ages? It's not a strike-a-match situation. You're carrying yesterday's embers in an iron pan, nursing them like a fragile egg, and hoping they don't go out before you can coax them into new flames. If they do, hope you enjoy 30 minutes of frantic flint striking while the lord of the manor yells about how his eggs are cold and his scepter is damp. Meanwhile, in the kitchens, the cook has begun preparing breakfast. And by preparing, we mean hurling wood into the great hearth and trying to get water to boil before next week. Kitchens were usually detached from the main building to prevent castle-wide fires, which is lovely in theory, but also means the people cooking your porridge are slowly turning into human icicles just to stop your noble stomach from rumbling. Now, remember how the noble chambers had thick tapestries, velvet curtains, and a canopy bed with heated stones nestled among the fox pelts? The servants slept in rooms that made stables look inviting. Bunks of straw in windowless cells, damp stone underfoot, and a draft so persistent you could use it to transport mail. Some lucky staff got to sleep in the great hall near the embers of the central fire, curled up in blankets that were essentially repurposed horse rugs. Others? They spooned for warmth, entirely out of necessity, forming makeshift human lasagnas that would give Victorian etiquette writers a collective faint. You want real resilience? Imagine scrubbing chamber pots in water so cold it laughs at your skin. Imagine trudging through snow in cloth shoes to fetch firewood from a frozen shed, while pretending your feet aren't crying. Nobles may have had chilblains and a minor case of whimpering. But the servants? The servants survived medieval winters through sheer stubbornness and an alarming tolerance for cold fingers. And the best part? If you did your job right, you remained completely invisible. The noble family never had to know just how many fires you lit, how many times you refilled the hot stones, or how many frozen chickens you defrosted with your breath. Their tea was hot. Their slippers were warm. Their cloaks were aired and slightly toasted before wearing. You? You've lost 3 fingernails to frostbite and haven't stopped shaking since All Saints' Day. Let's not forget the wet work. Literally. Laundry was a year-round nightmare, but winter transformed it into something resembling torture. Frozen water, frozen soap, yes, medieval soap froze, and linen so stiff they could probably walk themselves to the laundry line. And yet, someone had to do it. So out went the laundresses, hacking through ice, scrubbing on frozen stones, and hanging garments in wind so cruel it could flay a sheep. Still, servants had their tricks. The truly savvy ones wore multiple layers of wool stuffed with straw. They wrapped their feet in oiled cloth, used lard as a makeshift insulator, and rotated sleeping spots to soak up residual body heat from the person who slept there before. Not glamorous, but better than keeling over beside the kindling pile. And even in this chaos, a strange camaraderie formed. Late nights by the hearth, quiet jokes whispered over fire-tending duties, a stolen cup of hot cider meant for his lordship. There was a shared understanding. Survival depended on each other, not the whims of the well-draped figures above. It wasn't just labor. It was life lived in the gaps between noble comfort and real hardship. Every ember lit, every cloth warmed, every frozen basin carried through icy halls was a tiny act of rebellion against winter's grip, and proof that the castle didn't run on titles or tapestries. It ran on the people no one saw. So the next time you read about Lord Somebody's elegant winter court, remember, behind every perfectly polished goblet and roasted goose was a shivering, sniffling, heroic human, trying very hard not to slip on the frost while carrying your candle. And as we drift back upstairs, where the lords and ladies enjoy their hot toddies and embroidered bed covers, know this: the fire may burn at the center of the hall, but it's the quiet footsteps in the shadows that keep it alive. Now, breathe easy. The servants are making one last check before they bank the embers for the night. The wind rattles the stained glass windows, and somewhere down below, a kitchen girl wraps herself in her one dry blanket and drifts into sleep, still smelling of smoke and boiled turnips. Rest easy. They've done their part. For tonight, at least, the castle will not freeze. Welcome back to the castle. A drafty, echo-prone architectural miracle where you can throw a banquet for 200 but can't stop your bathwater from icing over. If you've made it through the night, congratulations. You've survived another medieval evening without becoming a noble-shaped icicle. And now it's morning, which means things are about to get worse. Because if there's one thing colder than a medieval castle at night, it's a medieval castle in the morning, when the fire's down to its last sulky ember and the air has the affectionate warmth of a crypt. Rising at dawn isn't noble heroism, it's punishment wrapped in velvet. Let's begin with the nobleman's waking ritual. You, Lord Reginald of somewhere remote, are sprawled beneath a fortress of pelts and goose-down covers. You've got a velvet nightcap askew on your head, and the very strong suspicion that your breath has frozen somewhere mid-exhale. But it's not your job to be alert. That task falls to your unfortunate valet, who must sneak into your chamber, now colder than the outer walls, and gently revive the fire, relight the candles, and prepare a comfortably lukewarm towel for you to press to your princely face. And if he's lucky, he hasn't slipped on the frost that formed inside the window overnight. Bathing, for obvious reasons, is out of the question. In summer, maybe you had a tepid splash in a wooden tub with flower petals. In winter, you freshen up by rubbing your wrists with a damp cloth and pretending you feel cleaner afterward. Medieval nobles had elaborate grooming kits, combs, tweezers, even little ivory ear scoops, but the general rule was, if it doesn't stink so badly you can't enter church, it's probably fine. Historical curiosity pill. Some nobles swore by scented gloves. You'd wear them for half the day, then hold your hands to your nose like a floral gas mask whenever someone else's hygiene became overwhelming, which, in winter, was constantly. Now, what about breakfast? You'd think that with freezing halls and numb toes, breakfast would be served piping hot and hearty. Not quite. The morning meal for nobles was often minimal. Bread, maybe some cheese, and a warm ale or spiced wine if you were lucky. The idea of breakfast as a robust meal was more a modern invention. Back then, you simply ate enough to prevent collapsing on your way to the chapel. Speaking of the chapel, yes, it's time to pray. Nothing makes you feel closer to the divine like kneeling on a stone floor, colder than sin itself, while a priest recites Latin through breath visible in the air. Nobles maintained chapels within their keeps, not just for devotion, but because trekking to the village church in winter was how you became a cautionary tale. After morning prayers, the castle gradually sputters to life. Servants shuffle through halls carrying firewood in awkward bundles. The blacksmith is already hammering something in a shed barely more sheltered than a tree stump. Maids dash from room to room with heated bricks for footstools, and all the while, the castle remains stubbornly cold. You see, medieval castles weren't designed for comfort. They were fortresses first, defensive machines carved from frozen rock. High ceilings? Gorgeous. But they trap heat so efficiently that it never reaches anyone under 6 feet tall. Windows? Narrow slits perfect for archery, and letting in the occasional polar gust. Doors? Heavy enough to require a full-body shove, which would be fine if your muscles hadn't stiffened into granite during the night. So nobles developed coping strategies. You spend your day moving between hot zones, that is, the rooms where someone's had the foresight or rank to light a fire. The solar, for instance, is your best bet. It's a smaller, more intimate room typically on the upper floor, and therefore marginally warmer, often reserved for reading, writing, or dramatically staring into the hearth while pretending to reflect on state affairs. During particularly brutal cold snaps, entire noble families would temporarily abandon the larger halls and live communally in these warmer side chambers. That's right. Even the aristocracy knew when to give up on grandeur and huddle like peasants who'd recently discovered embroidery. And then there was movement. Nobles walked. A lot. Up and down staircases, around corridors, out to the stables, back to the hall, partly out of duty, but mostly just to stay warm. Because in a castle, staying still was the quickest way to become a statue. Wool was your constant companion, not just cloaks and tunics, but lined leggings, undercaps, and mittens so thick they made writing letters feel like medieval finger painting. Cloaks were often double-layered with fur on the inside and waxed wool on the outside, less of a fashion statement and more of a personal tent. And then there were the dogs. Yes, the dogs. Noble households kept lapdogs not just for companionship or status, but for warmth. These pampered creatures were allowed to sleep on beds, curl up on laps, or nestle around feet like furry, living hot water bottles. The term three-dog night? Completely accurate. It referred to the number of dogs you needed to avoid freezing to death in your bed. One dog? Mildly chilly. 3 dogs? Congratulations. You might live to see breakfast. Of course, the castle wasn't just a giant freezer box. There were pockets of true comfort. A roaring hearth in the great hall, a feather-stuffed bed in a south-facing chamber, a goblet of mulled wine so strong it made your ears tingle. And every now and then, a particularly sunny day would creep through the windows and make you briefly forget you lived inside a Gothic wind tunnel. But that feeling never lasted, because winter always returned, creeping through the arrow slits, curling beneath the doors, and whispering through the gaps in the rush-covered floor. And the only real defense against it? Routine. Daily, stubborn, dignified routine. Get up, get dressed, chase the warmest room, bribe the fire with wood, and thank the saints for heated bricks. As the sun begins its lazy descent behind the hills, your noble routine kicks into its second shift, preparing for another long, icy night. The servants refill the braziers. The draperies are pulled tight. Candles are lit with practiced hands. A hot stone is lowered into your bed, and as you sip your steaming cider, you look around the hall and wonder, not for the first time, if somewhere out there peasants might be warmer. They probably are, but at least your dog smells better than their goat. And so you return to your bed, layer yourself like a noble cabbage, and listen to the wind whistle through the parapets. Another day conquered, another night survived. And if your hot stone cracks the footboard again, well, that's tomorrow's frostbitten problem. By now, you've survived 3 days inside your scenic but sub-zero fortress, dodging frostbite with furs, footstools, and sheer noble entitlement. But today's focus isn't fire, fleece, or flannel. No, today we step outside. Yes, outside, into the swirling white horror of a medieval winter landscape, where even the trees look like they've given up on life. Because sometimes, for all your titles, tapestries, and toasted chamber pots, you simply must leave the castle. And when that happens, the medieval countryside doesn't care if you're Duke of anything. It's going to slap you across the face with wind so sharp it could shave a monk. But let's start indoors. The summons arrives over breakfast. A hot beverage, stale bread, and a cheese that might legally be considered a fossil. One of your vassals, bless his frost-bitten loyalty, has dared to request your physical presence to resolve a land dispute involving sheep, fences, and probably long-standing generational rage. Now, you could send a bailiff, but then people might say, you're going soft. Nobility has responsibilities, after all, including personal appearances in the freezing muck. So out comes the travel cloak, thick, fur-lined, and roughly the weight of a small horse. You're laced into boots so stiff they double as mobile coffins for your toes. Your gloves are stiff from yesterday's snowmelt. And your hat? An insult to fashion, but a triumph of survival. Something between a bonnet, a bucket, and a mummified raccoon. Historical curiosity pill. Some nobles wore hooded capes with liripipes, long tails of fabric that could be wrapped like scarves. Originally stylish, these became makeshift weather gear. In bad weather, form followed function. And the function was not dying. Your steed awaits, already steaming in the courtyard, not from exertion, but from pure disbelief that anyone would willingly ride in this weather. Horses in winter were rugged, shaggy, and perpetually unimpressed. And if they slipped on ice, well, that's just another reminder that medieval life had very limited health insurance. The castle gates creak open, and there it is. The Great White beyond. A field of slush, sleet, and broken dreams, stretching out to the tree line where the wolves have been muttering about dinner since October. You ride slowly, dignified, which is noble speak for trying very hard not to break your hip on a hidden patch of frozen mud. And it's not just the cold. The journey is a gauntlet of medieval winter hazards. Falling snow obscures the path. Frozen streams threaten to crack underhoof. That charming wooden bridge, currently auditioning for the role of death trap, and every gust of wind feels personal, like nature itself resents your social status. By the time you arrive, cheeks numb, eyelids frozen to your eyebrows, the villagers are already there, watching from beneath straw capes and knitted desperation. They look warmer than you. Probably are warmer than you. They've mastered the art of wrapping themselves in 14 layers of goat-smelling wool and pretending it's perfectly fine. You dismount like a hero, trying not to squeak audibly when your feet hit the icy ground. You stride into the thatch-roofed dispute zone, aka someone's shed, and do your duty. Mediate, rule, grumble theatrically. Fine someone a shilling. Admire your own handwriting. Leave before your nose detaches. Then it's back to the castle, which now, despite its damp draftiness and eternal gloom, has started to feel incredibly appealing. You arrive with ice in your eyebrows and snow in places best left unmentioned. A servant helps you peel off the outer layers. Your cloak hits the floor with a soggy thud. You can't feel your ears. You're fairly certain one toe is negotiating its departure from your foot, but the fire is still burning. The braziers have been stoked. Your boots are replaced with fur slippers. A goblet of warm wine materializes in your hand with suspicious speed. And suddenly, just for a moment, it feels like you've won the day. Until, of course, you remember that you have a feast to attend tonight. Oh yes, midwinter meant feasting, not because food was plentiful, it wasn't, but because nobles believed that eating giant pies in freezing halls while minstrels wept on lutes was a great way to forget the fact that the moat had frozen solid and the latrines were beginning to back up. Dinner is held in the great hall, where the fire has been roaring since noon and still can't quite reach the far end of the room. Servants carry in trenchers of meat and bread, their faces glowing with sweat and mild resentment. Nobles chatter. Dogs bark. Someone sneezes and discreetly wraps their head in an extra scarf. Plague season doesn't stop just because it's cold. The food? Hot, heavy, and designed to glue your insides together until spring. Think stews thicker than masonry, puddings that double as insulation, and roasted meats so salty they might be trying to preserve you. Wine is spiced and steaming. Ale is warm and flat. The mood? Slightly delirious with cold and calories. And then come the entertainments. A poet reciting tales of summer, traitor, a tumbler whose breath fogs the air with each cartwheel, and possibly a boar's head carried in on a platter like an edible mascot of winter's triumph. By the time you crawl back to your chamber, overfed and undercirculated, the fire has burned low, and your hot stone is only mostly warm. But you don't care. You're back indoors. You survived the day. And even if your pinky toe turns black by morning, you've got 3 spares. Nobles always land on their frost-bitten feet. So curl up, pull the pelts close. Ignore the wind that's howling like a chorus of unpaid minstrels. You've earned your sleep tonight. Because tomorrow the snowdrifts reach the stables, and nobody knows where the hawk trainer went. So here we are, the 5th day of noble winter survival, and by now your castle smells like damp wool, burnt bread, and the faint aroma of regret. You've faced frozen latrines, horse-slick roads, and a fireplace with the enthusiasm of a soggy match. But this final part, this is where things get serious. Because no matter how many furs you pile on, how many servants you throw at the hearth, or how many steaming goblets you clutch for emotional support, there comes a point in winter where you stop asking how to stay warm and start asking if spring is ever coming. It's February, the cruelest month, if only because it pretends to be short while dragging its icy feet across your soul. Let's begin with the castle walls. Remember those majestic stone defenses you were so proud of back in October? They've now cracked in 3 places. The tapestries are molding, and there's a persistent drip in the chapel that no one can find. The draft from the western corridor has become so aggressive that it might qualify as a minor invasion force. You pass it on your way to supper like an old enemy. It hisses. You hiss back. Your hands are raw. Your lips are chapped. Your knees sound like medieval percussion instruments. Even the dogs, once curled so faithfully at your feet, have begun burrowing under furniture with a look that says, "I didn't sign up for this." Food stocks are, let's say, imaginative. The salted pork now resembles a building material. The beans have developed personalities. And last night's soup involved something called preserved eel jelly, which should never be spoken of again. The cook assures you it's traditional. You assure him you're considering monastic life. Historical curiosity pill. Castles typically stored food for winter in cellars, barrels, and salt pits. But spoilage was common. By late winter, nobles were essentially running medieval Chopped with whatever hadn't sprouted fur. And yet, the feast must go on. Because in noble culture, if you can't defeat the cold, you perform against it. Winter banquets became even more elaborate the colder it got. A theatrical defiance of frost. Guests huddled in fur-lined cloaks, gloved hands clutching goblets, teeth chattering discreetly as they applauded fire dancers whose main skill was not bursting into flame. But even performance has its limits. Somewhere around the 4th snowfall in a week, things shift. The servants are exhausted. Fires burn low because the woodpile is shrinking faster than the wine supply. The snow has sealed the outer courtyard, trapping the chickens in and the pigs out, which is awkward for everyone. The blacksmith's apprentice went missing last Tuesday, and someone found a boot print halfway up the curtain wall. You're choosing not to investigate further. This is the moment where noble families reach for their final weapon: religion. No, not the smug Sunday kind with gold-threaded robes and organ music. The desperate, frost-bitten kind. The kind that sends everyone kneeling on cold stone floors whispering, "Please, God, if you spare the roof, I promise not to complain about Lent this year." It's time for vigil candles. The priest lights them near doorways, near hearths, near that mysterious crack in the floor that now emits cold like a cursed well. Families gather to pray to Saint Blaise, throat ailments, Saint Nicholas, house protection, and Saint Brigid, basically the patron saint of Please let me make it to April. Every flicker of flame feels like hope, until the wax runs out. And then the cold plays its final trick. Boredom. Oh yes, you'd think freezing to death would be more exciting. But before that comes ennui. You've played all the chess. You've heard all the lute songs. The court jester has frostbite and a bad attitude. The children are reciting Latin in increasingly aggressive tones. You once caught yourself staring at a wall for 2 full hours, debating whether the draft coming from the left was a ghost or just the usual air leak. You become introspective. Noble letters from this period include complaints like, "I have not felt my feet since Christmastide. My wife speaks only in prayers and soup recipes. The geese have begun speaking to me, and I fear they are right." But then, one morning, when the firewood is just twigs, the wine is just vinegar, and the sky has been gray for so long it might be a conspiracy, something shifts. The sunlight through the stained glass looks slightly less judgmental. The snow outside has turned to slush. You hear a bird, not screaming, just existing. And one brave violet peeks out from the base of the outer wall, growing sideways like a botanical rebellion. Spring is coming, slowly, reluctantly, like a squire returning to clean up after a feast. But it's coming. You'll still get storms. And yes, there will be that one blizzard in March that tries to destroy everything. But the worst is over. The frost loosens its grip. Your dog emerges from under the sideboard. Someone suggests hanging the laundry outside. You cry a little. The castle didn't fall. You didn't freeze. You still have most of your toes. You, dear Noble, have survived the winter. You've faced the cold winds, the stone walls, the suspicious meat, the vengeful drafts, and the full, tragic life cycle of a winter turnip. You've banked the fire, bribed the priest, and snuggled with a dog that now legally owns part of your bed. And now, as sunlight stretches a little longer across the rush-strewn floor, you allow yourself to believe, just a little, that maybe life isn't a constant frost-covered siege after all. So take a deep breath. The moat is thawing. The hearth still glows. And your fur-lined boots no longer feel like medieval punishment devices. You made it. Now go check on the pigs. They're not going to reintroduce themselves to the courtyard on their own.